The Grand Hall of Valdris Prime was the most beautiful building in the entire galaxy. Its walls were made of crystal that caught light from 3 different suns. Thousands of alien species gathered inside, their voices echoing off the high ceiling. This was the Coalition Summit, where leaders from hundreds of worlds came together to talk about important matters. Ambassador Taewon stood near the back of the hall with his small team. He was a human from Earth, dressed in a simple gray suit that looked plain compared to the colorful robes and armor of the other delegates. Taewon had worked hard for 5 years to earn respect for his people. It was not easy. Most aliens saw humans as weak creatures who barely deserved to be in the coalition. Behind Taewon stood 3 security guards. One of them was Corporal Hyunwoo, a young soldier with quiet eyes and steady hands. Hyunwoo never talked much. He simply watched and listened, always alert for danger. He was not tall or impressive looking. Next to the massive aliens around him, he seemed small and fragile. At the front of the hall, on a platform that rose above the crowd, stood Princess Sharin of the Kael'var Empire. She was magnificent and terrifying at the same time, 9 feet tall, covered in silvery white fur with amber eyes that glowed like fire. Her people were famous warriors, the strongest fighters in the known galaxy. Every Kael'var was born with muscles like steel cables and bones that could break through metal. They could heal from terrible wounds in just hours. Princess Sharin was speaking about her people's recent victories in battle. Her voice was deep and powerful, filling the entire hall without any need for technology to make it louder. She talked about how the Kael'var had protected the coalition from pirates and invaders, how their strength kept everyone safe, how they were the natural leaders of the galaxy. Then her speech took a darker turn. She began to talk about the newer members of the coalition, about species that had joined recently but had not proven their worth. Her eyes moved across the crowd and stopped on the human delegation. Some species were allowed into the coalition out of kindness, not because they earned it, Princess Sharin said. Her lips curved into a smile that showed her sharp teeth. Humans, for example. They live such short lives. Their bodies break so easily. They have no natural weapons, no tough skin, no ability to heal quickly. What can such weak creatures offer to a society of warriors? Taewon felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his face calm. He had dealt with this kind of insult many times before. He raised his hand to speak, and after a moment, Princess Sharin nodded to allow it. Princess Sharin, Taewon said in a clear voice, humanity may not have physical strength like the Kael'var, but we have achieved much through our intelligence and creativity. We have made great advances in science and medicine. Our art and music bring beauty to the galaxy. Our philosophers have explored questions of meaning and purpose. Strength is not the only thing that matters. The princess laughed, and many in the crowd laughed with her. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder. Pretty words, she said, but words do not win battles. Words do not protect the innocent. In the end, only strength matters. Only power. A warrior knows this truth. She reached behind her back and pulled out an enormous sword. The weapon was legendary throughout the galaxy. The Fang of Valdris, it was called. The blade was 6 feet long, made of metal that shimmered like starlight. It had been carried by Kael'var royalty for 3,000 years. But the most impressive thing about the sword was its weight. 800 pounds of solid metal and ancient technology. Princess Sharin held the massive sword with one hand as if it weighed nothing. Then she walked to the center of the platform and thrust the blade down into the floor. The marble cracked under its weight. The sword stood upright, its handle pointing toward the ceiling. I make a challenge to this assembly, the princess announced. Anyone who can lift the Fang of Valdris may keep it as their own. It is worth more than entire planets. Its technology is priceless. Its history is sacred to my people. But if someone can lift it, I will admit they have strength worthy of respect. She looked directly at Taewon again. Perhaps one of the humans would like to try? Or are you only capable of speaking clever words? Several alien delegates stepped forward to attempt the challenge. First came a massive creature from a high-gravity world, with 4 arms and a body like living rock. He grabbed the sword's handle with all his strength. His muscles bulged. His feet cracked the floor beneath him. But the sword did not move even slightly. He gave up, breathing heavily. Next came a crystalline being who could generate powerful magnetic fields. She tried to use her natural abilities to move the metal blade. Nothing happened. The sword contained technology that resisted such manipulation. One by one, the strongest beings in the coalition tried and failed. The crowd began to laugh and cheer, treating it like entertainment. Princess Sharon watched with satisfaction, her point proven. Physical strength was what mattered, and no one could match the Kael'var. Then her eyes returned to the human delegation. What about Earth's representatives? Surely someone will try. Or does humanity only excel at running away from challenges? The hall went silent. Every eye in the massive room turned toward Taewon and his team. The ambassador felt the weight of that attention. This was a trap, he knew. If no human tried, it would confirm that they were cowards. If someone tried and failed, it would prove they were weak. Either way, Princess Sharon would have her victory. Taewon prepared to give a diplomatic response that would deflect the insult without accepting the impossible challenge. But before he could speak, someone stepped forward from behind him. Corporal Hyunwoo moved through the crowd of delegates with quiet confidence. He did not look angry or excited. His face was calm, almost peaceful. He walked like a man taking a simple stroll, not someone about to attempt an impossible feat. "Corporal, you don't have to do this," Taewon whispered urgently. Hyunwoo glanced back at him and gave a small smile. "Someone should try, sir. We can't let the challenge go unanswered." The crowd erupted in laughter as Hyunwoo climbed onto the platform. He looked so small next to Princess Sharin, barely reaching her shoulder. The contrast between them was almost comical. The massive wolf warrior and the ordinary human soldier. "This should be entertaining," Princess Sharin said, her voice dripping with amusement. "Please, human, show us your strength." But Hyunwoo did not immediately grab the sword. Instead, he walked slowly around it, examining it from every angle. He looked at how the blade entered the floor, at the angle of the handle, at the way light reflected off its surface. His eyes were focused, analytical. He was studying the problem like a puzzle to be solved. The crowd's laughter grew louder. What was this human doing? Did he think looking at the sword would make it lighter? After a full minute of examination, Hyunwoo knelt beside the sword. He placed his hands on the handle, testing the grip. Then he did something that made the laughter stop. He closed his eyes and became perfectly still. His breathing slowed. In and out. Deep and steady. Those close enough could see his body changing, muscles tensing and relaxing in a specific pattern. He looked like he was preparing for something, gathering himself. Taewon watched with growing concern. He had served with Hyunwoo for 2 years and knew the young soldier had been in special forces before becoming a diplomatic guard. But even special forces training could not let a human lift 800 pounds of sword that even the strongest aliens could not budge. Princess Sharin watched too, her amusement fading into curiosity. There was something in the human's absolute stillness that was different from the other challengers. They had approached the sword with confidence in their natural strength. This human approached it with calculation and preparation. Hyunwoo opened his eyes. He adjusted his feet, finding the perfect stance. He set his grip on the handle. Then he took one more deep breath and pulled. At first, nothing happened. The fang of Valdris stood as immovable as a mountain. Hyunwoo's arms trembled with effort, every muscle in his body straining against the impossible weight. The veins in his neck stood out like cords. His face turned red from the pressure. The crowd began to laugh again, relieved that the universe was returning to normal. Of course, the human could not lift it. No one could lift it except the Kael'var. This was just another failed attempt, slightly more amusing because the human was so much smaller than the previous challengers. Princess Sharin started to turn away, ready to declare her point proven. But then someone in the crowd gasped. The sword had moved. Just a tiny bit, barely a fraction of an inch, but it had definitely moved. The laughter died instantly, every eye in the grand hall fixed on the human and the ancient blade. It was impossible. The sword weighed 800 pounds. It had technology built into it that made it even heavier for anyone who was not Kael'var. The strongest beings in the galaxy had just tried and failed completely, but Hyunwoo was not trying to overpower the sword with brute strength. He had spent his minute of observation understanding the physics of the situation. He found the exact angle where the leverage would be best. He positioned his body to use his legs and core, not just his arms. He distributed the weight across his entire skeleton. More importantly, he had used a technique taught only to Special Forces soldiers on Earth. A meditation method that allowed humans to temporarily turn off their body's safety limits. The human body is actually much stronger than people realize, but the brain keeps most of that strength locked away to prevent injury. Muscles can tear, Bones can break, so the brain says no, you cannot use your full power. But in moments of extreme emergency, these limits can be overridden. This is how mothers lift cars off their trapped children, how people in burning buildings perform impossible feats. Hyunwoo had learned to access this state deliberately, through breathing and mental focus. It was incredibly dangerous. It would destroy his body. But for a few seconds, he could push past normal human limits. The sword moved again. Another inch. Then another. The sound in the hall was absolute silence now. Even Princess Sharon stared with her mouth slightly open, her amber eyes wide with disbelief. Hyunwoo's breathing became harsh and ragged. Blood vessels burst in his eyes, turning the whites red. His muscles were tearing under the strain. The bones in his spine compressed dangerously, but he did not stop. He could not stop. His people were watching. The entire galaxy was watching. Someone had to answer the challenge. He made a sound, something between a grunt and a scream. Then, using every last bit of strength in his body, he lifted. The fang of Valdris came free from the floor with a grinding sound of breaking marble. Hyunwoo held it up, his arms fully extended above his head. The massive blade caught the light from the crystal walls, shining like a star. For exactly 3 seconds he held that position, long enough for everyone to see. Long enough for every camera and recording device in the hall to capture the moment. A human, barely 6 feet tall, holding a sword that should have been impossible for him to even budge. Then his body gave out. His legs buckled. The sword fell from his hands and hit the floor with a thunderous crash. Hyunwoo collapsed beside it, gasping for air, his face twisted in pain. The grand hall exploded into chaos. Aliens jumped to their feet, shouting in 100 different languages. Some were angry, claiming it must be a trick. Others were excited, amazed at what they had witnessed. A few looked frightened, suddenly realizing that humans might be more dangerous than anyone had thought. Ambassador Tae-won rushed to Hyunwoo's side, along with the other security guards. Medical teams were already running toward them, carrying emergency equipment. "You foolish, brave man," Tae-won said quietly, kneeling beside his fallen guard. "Why did you do this?" Hyunwoo managed a weak smile through the pain. "Had to, sir. Someone had to show them we're not weak, that we can't be dismissed." The medical team arrived with a stretcher. They quickly scanned Hyunwoo's body and their expressions became serious. Multiple torn muscles, 3 cracked ribs, severe damage to his rotator cuffs, compression fractures in his spine. The human had destroyed his own body to lift that sword. As they carefully lifted him onto the stretcher, Hyunwoo's eyes found Princess Sharon. She still stood on the platform, frozen in place, staring at the scene below her. For the first time in her life, the great warrior princess looked completely shocked. Their eyes met for a moment. Then Hyunwoo was carried away toward the medical facility, and the crowd swallowed the view. Princess Sharon finally moved. She walked slowly to where the fang of Valdris lay on the floor. According to ancient Kael'var law, the sword now belonged to the human who had lifted it. 3,000 years of tradition said so. The weapon that had been passed down through her family for generations was no longer hers. But that was not what troubled her most. What troubled her was the question echoing in her mind, the same question everyone in the hall was asking. How? How had a human done the impossible? She had seen his body before the attempt. Thin muscles, fragile bones, no natural armor or enhanced healing. By every measure of strength that mattered in the galaxy, he should have failed as completely as all the others. Yet he had succeeded. And in succeeding, he had broken something in her understanding of the universe. Strength was not what she thought it was. Power had different forms. The weak creature had done what the strong could not. Over the next few days, as news of the incident spread across the galaxy, Princess Sharon found she could not stop thinking about it. She watched the recording over and over. She studied every second of Hyunwoo's preparation, his technique, his impossible lift. She demanded access to all available information about human biology. What she learned surprised her. Humans were indeed physically weak compared to most spacefaring species, but they had other qualities that she had never considered important. Humans could run for incredible distances. While most predators were faster in short bursts, humans could maintain a steady pace for hours or even days. On their homeworld, ancient humans had hunted by simply following prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Humans could survive on almost any type of food. The Kael'var needed specific nutrients. Many species had very limited diets, but humans could eat plants, meat, and things in between. They could live almost anywhere. Most interesting was the human ability to override their own biological limits. Every species had safety mechanisms to prevent self-injury, but humans could deliberately turn these off. They could push themselves to the point of death if they believed it was necessary. Princess Sharon read reports of human history. She learned about explorers who walked across frozen wastelands, about siege defenders who held their positions for years against impossible odds, about athletes who trained until their bodies broke, then healed and trained more, about ordinary people who did extraordinary things simply because they refused to give up. The humans called it different things: determination, grit, stubbornness, the refusal to quit. But whatever the name, it was a kind of strength that the Kelvar had never needed to develop. When you were born as the strongest, fastest, toughest species around, you never learned how to struggle. You never learned how to win when winning should be impossible. 1 week after the incident, Princess Sharon made a decision. She requested a private meeting with Corporal Hyunwoo. Ambassador Taewon was suspicious of her motives, but Hyunwoo agreed to meet her. She found him in the Coalition medical facility, his body wrapped in advanced healing bandages. He was sitting up in bed reading a book. When she entered, he looked up calmly, showing no fear despite her size and reputation. "Princess," he said politely, putting the book aside. "This is unexpected." Sharon stood by the door for a moment, trying to find the right words. Finally, she asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why did you do it? You knew you would be hurt badly. You could have died. For what? Pride?" Hyunwoo shook his head. "Not pride, duty. You challenged my people in front of the whole galaxy. If no one answered, it would have confirmed everything you said about us. That we are weak. That we don't belong in the Coalition. Someone had to try. But you destroyed your own body," she said, stepping closer. "The damage you did to yourself will take months to heal fully. Was it worth that cost?" Hyunwoo met her amber eyes with his calm brown ones. "Yes, my people need respect in the Coalition. If my pain bought that respect, then it was a fair trade. My life matters less than the future of humanity among the stars." Princess Sharon felt something shift inside her. In Kelvar culture, warriors fought for personal glory, to make their own names legendary, to be remembered. The idea of deliberately suffering for the good of others was foreign to her, but there was something powerful about it, something she did not fully understand yet. "I have been studying your species," she admitted, "trying to understand how you did what should have been impossible. And I realize I was wrong about humans. You are not simply weak. You are different. Your strength comes from places I never thought to look." Hyunwoo smiled slightly. "We're not strong like you are, Princess, but we're very hard to stop. That's not the same thing, but it seems to work well enough." 2 months passed. The news of what happened in the Grand Hall spread to every corner of the galaxy. The image of Corporal Hyunwoo holding the fang of Valdris above his head became famous. Some species saw it as proof that humans were more dangerous than anyone realized. Others saw it as a lucky accident, a fluke that would never happen again. But Princess Sharon could not stop thinking about it. Every day she studied more about humanity. She watched recordings of Earth's history. She read their books, listened to their music, tried to understand what made them different from every other species in the galaxy. What she discovered both fascinated and disturbed her. Humans were not simply weaker versions of warrior species. They were something else entirely. They had evolved not as the strongest predators on their planet, but as persistence hunters, creatures who succeeded not through raw power, but through the refusal to give up. On Earth, there were animals faster than humans, stronger than humans, with better senses and natural weapons, but humans had one advantage that no other creature possessed. They could keep going. Hour after hour, day after day, they would track prey across vast distances, never stopping until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. This ability shaped everything about them. Their bodies could sweat to stay cool during long chases. They could eat almost anything, surviving in environments where specialized hunters would starve. Their minds could ignore pain and fatigue when necessary, pushing past normal limits. Princess Sharon read about human explorers who crossed frozen continents on foot, about siege defenses that lasted for years against superior forces, about athletes who trained until their bodies broke, healed, and trained again, about scientists who worked for decades on problems everyone said were impossible to solve. The Kelvar valued strength and honor in battle. They fought bravely and died gloriously, But humans valued something different. They valued survival, not just personal survival, but the survival of their families, their communities, their entire species, and they would endure any suffering, overcome any obstacle to ensure that survival. It was a kind of strength Princess Sharon had never considered before. Not the strength to dominate, but the strength to endure. Not the power to destroy enemies, but the power to refuse defeat no matter how certain it seemed. She visited Hyunwoo several more times during his recovery. At first, she came with questions about human biology and tactics, but gradually their conversations became something more. They talked about philosophy, about what it meant to be strong, about the different ways species could succeed in the galaxy. Hyunwoo was always polite and honest with her. He never boasted about what he had done. In fact, he seemed almost embarrassed by all the attention. He was just a soldier, he said. He had done his duty, nothing more. But Princess Sharon understood that his humility was also a form of strength. He did not need glory or recognition. He knew what he had accomplished and why. That was enough for him. One evening, as the three sons of Valdris Prime sat outside the medical facility windows, Sharon asked him something she had been wondering about. Do humans ever feel fear? Hyunwoo looked up from his book, surprised by the question. Of course we do. We feel fear all the time. Fear is how we stay alive. But you did not show fear when you lifted the sword. You knew you would be badly hurt, yet you tried anyway. Hyunwoo smiled. I was terrified, Princess. My hands were shaking when I first grabbed the handle. But fear and action are not opposites. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. She thought about this for a long moment. In Kelvar culture, warriors were supposed to be fearless. To show fear was to show weakness, but maybe that was wrong. Maybe true strength was feeling the fear and moving forward anyway. Your people are strange, she said finally, but I am beginning to understand why you survived despite your physical limitations. Hyunwoo laughed, a warm sound that filled the small room. We are definitely strange, but strange has worked out well for us so far. 3 months after the sword incident, a new crisis emerged. It came from the edge of known space, from a region that had been explored but never colonized. The first warning was the loss of communication with a small mining colony. Then a research station went silent. Then an entire settlement world coalition scout ships were sent to investigate. What they found was terrifying. A hostile force unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. They called themselves the Ravager Swarm, though whether that was their true name or just what they were called by their victims was unclear. The Ravagers were not like normal invaders. They were not interested in conquest or resources or territory. They simply consumed. They would arrive at a world, break it down into raw materials and use those materials to build more of themselves. Then they would move to the next world and do it again. Worse, they learned from every encounter. Their bodies were made of some kind of living crystal that could adapt and change. If you shot them with lasers, they developed laser-resistant armor. If you used explosives, they scattered and reformed. Every weapon the Coalition used against them became less effective after just 1 or 2 battles. Within weeks, 6 Coalition worlds had fallen. Billions of lives lost. The greatest military powers in the galaxy threw their forces against the swarm and were defeated again and again. Traditional warfare was failing completely. An emergency war council was called on Valdris Prime. Every military commander and political leader in the Coalition gathered to decide what to do. Princess Sharon attended as commander of the Kelvar Defense Fleet. Ambassador Taiwan was there representing Earth, along with Lieutenant Hyunwoo, who had been promoted after recovering from his injuries. The mood in the War Council room was dark. Coalition generals showed maps and projections. At the current rate of advance, the Ravager Swarm would reach the core worlds within 2 years. Earth and Valdris Prime would be destroyed. Trillions would die. The proposed solution was desperate. Evacuate as many civilians as possible to the outer edges of the galaxy. Gather all remaining military forces for one massive final battle at the Coalition core. Try to inflict enough damage that the swarm would decide this sector of space was too costly and move elsewhere. It was essentially a plan to accept defeat, to retreat and hope the enemy would let them go. Princess Sharon listened to the generals talking and felt anger rising in her chest. This was not how warriors were supposed to face threats. Where was the courage? Where was the determination to fight until the last breath? Then a voice spoke up from the back of the room. Lieutenant Hyunwoo raised his hand politely and said, "That plan will not work. "We need a different approach." The room went silent. A young human lieutenant was challenging the strategy developed by the most experienced military minds in the galaxy. Some of the generals looked angry at the interruption, but Princess Sharon leaned forward with interest. "Explain," she commanded. Hyunwoo stood up and walked to the front of the room. He looked nervous facing all those powerful leaders, but his voice was steady. "The Ravagers adapt to whatever tactics we use against them. They learn from every battle. So fighting them the traditional way, with big fleets and direct confrontations, plays into their strength. Every time we attack, they get better at defending. Every weapon we use becomes less effective. We know this," one of the generals said impatiently. "That is why we are planning to retreat." "Retreating will not work either," Hyunwoo said. "The swarm consumes resources faster than you can evacuate people. And once they finish with this sector, they will just follow you to wherever you go. Running away is not a solution." "Then what do you suggest?" another general demanded. "If we cannot fight them and we cannot run, what options remain?" Hyunwoo pulled up a display showing Earth's history. Images of ancient wars, of guerrilla fighters, of asymmetric conflicts. "We changed the type of war we're fighting," he said. "Stop trying to defeat them in direct combat. Instead, make victory too expensive for them to pursue. Humans have fought wars like this for thousands of years. When you cannot win through strength, you win through persistence, through making every inch of ground cost more than it is worth, through never letting the enemy rest or consolidate their gains." He explained his plan in detail. Instead of large fleet battles, break the coalition forces into thousands of small units. Do not defend territory because the Ravagers would just overwhelm defenders. Instead, constantly harass them. Hit their supply lines. Set traps. Feed them false information. Make them waste resources chasing empty targets. The goal was not to destroy the swarm in a single great battle. The goal was to make the war so frustrating, so costly, so endless that they would eventually decide this sector of space was not worth the effort. Most of the generals rejected the idea immediately. It was dishonorable. It was cowardly. It was not how civilized species fought wars. Warriors met enemies in open battle and proved their superiority through courage and skill. But Princess Sharon stood up, her voice cutting through the arguments. "We do not need to fight with honor," she declared. "We need to fight to survive. The human is right. If traditional warfare has failed, we must try something different. I support this plan." The War Council debated for 3 days. Many generals opposed the human strategy. It went against everything they had been taught about warfare. But Princess Sharon used her influence to push the plan forward. The current approach was failing. They had to try something different or face extinction. Finally, the coalition agreed to implement a modified version of Lieutenant Hyunwoo's plan. Human military advisors were assigned to coalition fleets throughout the galaxy. They would teach the tactics that Earth had developed over thousands of years of asymmetric warfare. The change was dramatic and immediate. Coalition forces stopped trying to defend territory. Instead, they scattered into thousands of small units. Fast ships that could strike and disappear before the Ravagers could adapt. Mobile forces that hit supply lines and communication networks. They set traps in empty space. Automated mines that moved randomly so the swarm could not predict where they would be. False signals that made the Ravagers waste time and resources investigating phantom targets. Supply caches that exploded when the enemy tried to consume them. It was ugly and frustrating work. Coalition warriors raised on traditions of glorious battle hated the new tactics. There was no honor in running away after each attack. No glory in setting traps and hiding. Many felt like cowards, but it worked. The Ravager swarm's advance began to slow, not because they were losing battles, but because every meter forward cost them more resources than they gained. They would arrive at a world only to find it already evacuated and booby-trapped. They would chase a coalition fleet only to have it disappear into empty space. They would adapt to one tactic only to face something completely different the next day. Princess Sharon commanded a mixed force of Kalvar warriors and human advisors. She learned to value the perspective that humans brought to combat. Where she saw obstacles, they saw opportunities. Where she wanted to attack directly, they suggested misdirection. Where she valued courage, they valued cleverness. Lieutenant Hyunwoo served as her chief strategic advisor. Together, they became one of the most effective units in the entire coalition forces. Her Kalvar warriors provided the raw combat power. His human tactics provided the strategy. It was a combination that the Ravagers could not predict or adapt to quickly enough. One mission took them to a mining system that the swarm had recently invaded. The Ravagers were consuming an asteroid field, breaking down the rocks to build more of themselves. Traditional tactics would have been to attack directly with overwhelming force, try to destroy them before they could finish. But Hyunwoo suggested something different. They would not attack at all. Instead, they would contaminate the asteroids, inject them with materials that looked valuable, but were actually poisonous to the Ravagers' crystalline structure. Let the enemy consume the tainted resources and damage themselves. Princess Sharon was skeptical at first. Where was the battle? Where was the test of strength? But she had learned to trust the human perspective. They executed the plan, quietly seeding the asteroid field with contaminated materials while the Ravagers were focused on the outer edge of the system. 3 days later, the Ravager force in that system began to malfunction. Their bodies, built from the poisoned materials, started breaking down. They had to abandon the system entirely and rebuild themselves elsewhere. It was a victory without a single shot fired. "This is not how I imagined war," Princess Sharon admitted to Hyunwoo as they watched the Ravagers retreat. "But I cannot deny the results," Hyunwoo smiled. "War is not about honor or glory, Princess. War is about achieving your objectives with minimal cost. We cannot match the Ravagers in direct combat, so we do not fight that way. We fight in the way that gives us the advantage." "My father would have called this cowardice," she said quietly. "Perhaps, but cowardice that saves billions of lives is better than bravery that gets everyone killed. Humans learned this lesson over and over in our history. Sometimes the smart choice and the heroic choice are not the same thing." The war dragged on for months. Every week brought new challenges, new adaptations from the Ravagers, new tactics from the Coalition. It was exhausting and endless, but slowly, gradually, the momentum shifted. The Ravager swarm was designed for rapid conquest. They would arrive at a region of space, consume everything quickly, and move on. But the Coalition's new tactics prevented that. Every world took weeks or months to secure instead of days. Every advance cost more resources than the Ravagers gained. The swarm was not used to this kind of resistance. They were accustomed to overwhelming their enemies through sheer adaptive power. But you cannot adapt to an enemy who refuses to fight the same way twice. You cannot learn patterns when there are no patterns to learn. Princess Sharon found herself changing during the long months of war. She had always believed that strength meant the ability to dominate your enemies, to defeat them in direct combat through superior power. But the humans taught her a different kind of strength, the strength to endure, to persist, to keep fighting even when victory seemed impossible. She watched human soldiers work day after day with no complaints. They did boring, unglamorous jobs, set up supply lines, maintained equipment, gathered intelligence. They never got glory or recognition. But the war could not be won without them. She saw human engineers solve impossible problems through sheer determination. They would try one solution, fail, and immediately try another. They never gave up. They never accepted that something could not be done. They just kept working until they found an answer. Most importantly, she saw how humans supported each other. Kael'var warriors fought as individuals, each seeking personal glory, but humans fought as teams. They covered each other's weaknesses. They sacrificed personal recognition for group success. They understood that together, they were stronger than the sum of their parts. 1 year after the war began, the Ravager swarm made a decision. The hive mind, which operated on cold mathematical logic, calculated that this sector of space was too costly to conquer. The resistance was too organized. The resources gained did not justify the resources spent. There were easier targets elsewhere in the galaxy. The swarm began to withdraw. Coalition scouts reported the enemy forces gathering and moving away from civilized space, heading toward the unknown regions beyond the galactic rim. The Coalition had won. Not through a decisive battle, not through some super weapon or brilliant strategy. They won simply by refusing to lose, by making the cost of victory too high for the enemy to accept. When the news reached Valdris Prime, the celebration was enormous. Every city on every Coalition world erupted in joy. The impossible had happened. The unstoppable enemy had been stopped. Trillions of lives had been saved. Princess Sharin returned to Valdris Prime with her fleet. The journey back felt strange. She had left as a warrior princess confident in her people's superiority. She returned as someone different, Someone who understood that strength had many forms and that victory could be achieved through persistence as well as power. Lieutenant Hyunwoo traveled with her. He had been promoted to captain during the war, recognized for his strategic contributions. But he remained the same quiet, humble person he had always been. He seemed almost uncomfortable with all the attention and praise. As their ship approached Valdris Prime, Sharon stood on the observation deck, looking out at the 3 suns that lit her homeworld. Hyunwoo joined her there. "We did it," she said quietly. "We saved the galaxy." "You did it," Hyunwoo corrected. "You convinced the coalition to try a different approach. You led forces in the field. You adapted and learned. Without your support, my strategies would never have been implemented." Sharon turned to look at him. In the light of the suns, he looked small and fragile. Just a human, easily breakable, with a short life ahead of him. But she no longer saw weakness when she looked at him. She saw something more important. "You taught me something valuable, Captain. You taught me that refusing to quit is its own form of power. That there are many ways to be strong. My people were so powerful that we forgot how to struggle. We forgot that sometimes the greatest victories come not from dominating your enemy, but from simply outlasting them." Hyunwoo smiled. "Humans are not special, Princess. We just learned these lessons because we had no choice. When you are not the strongest or fastest, you find other ways to survive. We became very good at surviving. Perhaps," Sharon said thoughtfully, "survival is the most important strength of all." Their ship descended through the atmosphere of Valdris Prime. Below them, the Grand Hall waited, the same building where Hyunwoo had lifted the impossible sword over a year ago. That moment had changed everything. It had forced the galaxy to reconsider what strength meant, and in doing so, it had prepared them for the war that would test that understanding. The victory celebration in the Grand Hall of Valdris Prime was the largest gathering in Coalition history. Representatives from every member species filled the massive building. The crystal walls reflected light from decorations and displays showing images from the war. Heroes from 100 worlds stood together, united in their survival. But the focus of the celebration was on 2 figures who stood on the central platform. Princess Sharon of the Kael'var, now appointed Supreme Commander of Coalition Defense Forces, towered over the crowd in her ceremonial armor. Beside her stood Captain Hyunwoo, small and quiet in his simple military uniform. The crowd cheered as Princess Sharon stepped forward to speak. Her voice, as always, carried to every corner of the hall without need for amplification. "Today we celebrate not just victory in war, but the evolution of our understanding," she began. "For 3,000 years, the Coalition has measured strength in traditional ways. The size of our muscles, the power of our weapons, the fierceness of our warriors. These things are important, but the Ravager War taught us they are not everything." She gestured to Hyunwoo. "This human showed us a different kind of strength. Not the strength to dominate, but the strength to endure. Not the power to destroy, but the power to persist. He lifted a sword that should have been impossible for him to move. And in doing so, he showed us that determination can be as powerful as physical might." The crowd applauded, and Sharon had to wait for the noise to die down before continuing. "Then, when the Ravagers threatened to destroy us all, this same human showed us how to fight in a new way. How to win not through overwhelming force, but through refusing to accept defeat. The tactics he taught us, the perspective he brought to warfare, saved trillions of lives. Humanity earned its place in the Coalition not by becoming what we are, but by showing us what they already were." More applause echoed through the hall. Hyunwoo looked uncomfortable with all the attention, but he remained standing beside the princess, understanding that this moment was important for more than just him. "By ancient Kael'var law," Sharon continued, "the Fang of Valdris belongs to Captain Hyunwoo. He lifted it in fair challenge and won it as his prize. The sword has been in my family for 3,000 years, but it is his now." She gestured, and 2 attendants brought forward the massive blade. Even now, seeing it again, people in the crowd whispered in amazement. 800 pounds of ancient metal and technology. The sword that proved humanity deserved respect. But Hyunwoo stepped forward and did something no one expected. He bowed to Princess Sharon and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "Princess, I lifted the fang to make a point. That point has been made. The sword belongs to your people and your history. It should remain where it has meaning. I return it to you with respect and gratitude for all you have taught me." The crowd gasped. To refuse such a prize was almost unheard of in galactic culture. Trophies and honors were important. They proved your worth. But Hyunwoo had never cared about such things. He had lifted the sword because it needed to be done, not because he wanted a reward. Princess Sharon looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that few had ever seen on her face. "I accept your gift, Captain, but I make one condition." She turned to the attendants. "Modify the sword. Add a second grip to the handle, size for human hands. Let the Fang of Valdris be a symbol not of one species' power, but of what two species can accomplish together." The applause that followed was deafening. It was a perfect symbolic gesture. The ancient weapon would carry marks of both cultures. A reminder that strength comes in many forms, and that different peoples working together are stronger than any single group alone. After the ceremony, Princess Sharon and Captain Hyunwoo walked through the palace gardens. The three suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. For a moment, they were just two individuals, not representatives of their species or heroes of the war. "I have been thinking about what comes next," Sharon said as they walked. "The war is over, but the galaxy has changed. We cannot go back to the old ways of thinking." "Change is difficult," Hyunwoo agreed. "Many species will want to return to how things were before. Comfortable traditions and familiar hierarchies. But that would be a mistake. The Ravagers will return someday or something like them. And when they do, we need to remember the lessons we learned. That diversity makes us stronger. That there are many ways to solve problems. That cooperation is more powerful than competition." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Will you stay? As my advisor? Help me build a new kind of coalition defense force? One that values different perspectives and different kinds of strength." Hyunwoo smiled. "I would be honored, Princess. Though I should warn you that humans are very stubborn about doing things their own way. You may find us frustrating to work with," Sharin laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "I already find you frustrating, Captain. But I have learned that frustration often leads to growth. You challenge my assumptions and force me to think differently. That is valuable." They continued walking as the suns disappeared below the horizon. Behind them, the celebration in the grand hall continued. But here in the garden, there was peace and quiet. A moment to reflect on how far they had come. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not lifted the sword that day?" Sharin asked. Hyunwoo considered the question. "Yes, sometimes. Probably humans would have remained dismissed as weak and unimportant. When the Ravagers came, maybe the coalition would not have been willing to try new tactics. Maybe we would all be dead now." "One moment can change everything," she said quietly. "One decision. One act of courage. You could have let my insult pass. You could have stayed silent, but you chose to act even knowing the cost. That choice saved the galaxy." "I just did what needed to be done," Hyunwoo said, uncomfortable as always with praise. "Anyone in my position would have done the same." "No," Sharin said firmly. "Not everyone. Most people avoid difficult choices. They let someone else take the risk. They wait for heroes to appear instead of becoming heroes themselves. You did not wait. You acted. That is rare and precious." 5 years passed. The changes that began with a lifted sword continued to spread throughout the coalition. Human advisors worked with military forces from hundreds of species, teaching tactics and perspectives developed from Earth's long history of conflict. The concept of asymmetric warfare became standard study in every coalition military academy. More importantly, the way species viewed each other began to shift. The old hierarchies based purely on physical power started to break down. Species began to value diversity and different approaches to problems. The coalition became stronger not despite its differences but because of them. Earth's population expanded to colony worlds throughout coalition space. Humans were no longer seen as weak curiosities but as valuable members of galactic civilization. Their diplomatic corps grew. Their scientists made important discoveries. Their artists and musicians enriched galactic culture. Princess Sharin, now leading coalition defense forces, often visited Earth to observe human military training. She was fascinated by how they prepared soldiers not just for combat, but for thinking creatively under pressure. The emphasis on teamwork and adaptability instead of individual glory. The acceptance that sometimes the smart choice was to retreat and try again later. The Fang of Valdris, with its dual grips representing Kael'var and human cooperation, was placed in the Coalition War Museum. Millions of visitors came each year to see it and hear the story. Children of every species learned about the day a human lifted an impossible weight and changed the galaxy forever. But those who had lived through those transformative times knew the real story was more complex. It was not just about physical strength or clever tactics. It was about how an entire civilization learned to see value in what they had previously dismissed. How pride gave way to wisdom. How the strong learned from the weak. Captain Hyunwoo, now a decorated war hero and senior advisor, remained humble through it all. He continued to do his duty quietly and efficiently. He trained the next generation of human officers. He worked with Princess Sharon to build a defense strategy based on flexibility and persistence rather than just overwhelming force. When asked about his famous feat, about the moment he lifted the impossible sword, he always gave the same answer. I just refused to accept that it could not be done. That is what humans do. We find a way or we make one. We do not have the luxury of being naturally strong, so we had to develop other strengths. Determination, creativity, the refusal to give up. Those qualities served us well on Earth, and they serve us well among the stars. The Wolf Princess had mocked humanity's weakness, confident in the superiority of physical power. But she learned that weakness was just another word for potential, that the truly strong were not those born with advantages, but those who succeeded despite their disadvantages, that the ability to endure, to adapt, to refuse defeat was perhaps the greatest strength of all. Humanity earned its place among the stars not by changing what they were, but by showing the galaxy what they had always been. Survivors, problem solvers, the species that simply would not quit, no matter how impossible the challenge seemed. And in teaching that lesson to the galaxy, they saved it from destruction and forged a new understanding of what it meant to be strong.